So again, just to show it, the process here is selecting some faces, hitting U and unwrap, and then once we're done, we can select everything, go to UV and average islands scale to make sure that they're all in proportion with each other, and then UV and pack islands. Now that can be somewhat of a tedious process, especially with all of the different selection going on and all of that. So there is a way to do all of those steps all at once. And the way that it does that, the way that it decides which faces to select is based on an angle. So if you find a sharp angle between these two faces here, then it knows to separate out this face from that one and kind of split this edge in the UV editor. And what that's called is the Smart UV Project. So we can select everything in the 3D view, go to the UV menu, and go to Smart UV Project. You can see this angle limit here, which since most of our angles here are 90 degrees, we're not going to see much of a difference. So just go ahead and click OK. And there we go. We want to increase the margin a little bit. But I can see it's given us a nice layout pretty much automatically, and that's great. Let's see what it does if we add a little bit of curves to our object. So I'll hit Control R and add an edge loop here. Hit 2 to go to edge select mode and grab this along the x-axis. And then let's just hit Control B and bevel this out. And I'll scroll up to give this some more segments like so. Just like that. So we've got some triangles, we've got an n-gon even, and we've got some more complex geometry, but we can still go to U and Smart UV Project. And it's working great. But maybe we want to have these faces that make up this curve to be all one. So what we can do is increase the angle limit. And it looks like as we get past 85, then things start to get a little bit strange. It's still going to break right there in the center. So maybe I'll turn that back down again. Anything under 90 degrees, definitely. But let's set that back to whatever it was by default, somewhere around 65. And then we can just take these and unwrap them manually. I'll take all these faces because we want them to be connected, U and unwrap, and there we go. But then once we do that manually, then we will again have to go to select everything, go to UV, average island scale, UV, and pack islands. And then we can adjust that margin as needed. And there we have it. Now there are a couple different projection methods besides Smart UV Project. You can find those by hitting U or going to the UV menu. And we're mostly going to look at these three here. First is cube projection, which is not going to pack our islands for us. So to see the actual result, let's go to UV and pack islands. There we go. And as you can tell, it does a very similar thing. But what it's doing is it's just projecting from the top, the side, and the front. So it's very similar to cube mapping, which we looked at in a previous video in the node editor. It's just projecting from each of our 3 different axes. Then we also have cylinder projection, which works great for cylinders, but not much else. And similarly, sphere projection works great for spheres, and it tries to, give it the shape of a sphere. But for any other object, it really doesn't work that well. So those are pretty specialized. Actually, let's take a look at what those methods do on actual spheres and cylinders. If we give this sphere a sphere projection, we can go to UV and sphere. And you can see it changes it slightly, but it does work great for a sphere. So it just kind of takes the poles and pinches them to triangles there at the top. But it gives us a nice sphere projection. And this is what I would do if I were making like a globe or something like that. Then we can also do cylinders. I'll delete those vertices and Shift-A, add a cylinder. So the default unwrap is working well, but if we go to UV with the cylinder selected and do cylinder projection, then we're going to get this interesting wavy result. And that's because for whatever reason, it's dependent on the view. So we could switch that to align to object under direction rather than aligning it to different view angles. And then we get a nice straight projection along the sides here, and then the top are going to be pretty strange. So you'd want to unwrap those separately, just with U and unwrap, and that's going to give us a pretty similar unwrap to what we started with for this primitive. But what I wanted to show you is how the different projection methods work on more rounded objects. So let's say we have everything selected. I'll hit Control L to select everything that's linked to the selected face. and go to UV and Smart UV Project. Click OK, and that's going to give us a better idea of what the angle limit does. So as we decrease the angle limit, the more these faces are going to get split up. You can see our circles are not perfect here in the UV editor, so I'll uncheck stretch to UV bounds in this case, and that way it's not going to stretch that all the way up just in order to fill the square. The main thing I want you to remember from this video though is that you can select any set of faces and hit U and unwrap to get a 2D representation of it in the 3D view. And if you want to do that very quickly, then you can go to select everything, UV and Smart UV Project.